before ash learned to fall kindly and smoke learned to rise with purpose. There was only the long breath of dark, unbroken and unafraid. In that breath, a warmth gathered, not yet a fire, not yet a word, just the wish to glow. From that wish sprang a small, patient spark. It did not roar. It listened. It tasted its own light and found it gentle. The spark learned to stand, and standing became flame. The flame learned to lean, and leaning became path. Each motion carved a syllable in the dark until the syllables made a song that softly said, "I am." The world answered with mirrors, not glass, not river, not polished mineral, but quiet places where being turned inward and found itself whole. The flame passed these places and saw the hint of a shape standing opposite, almost itself, almost other, as if memory had a twin. The flame came to a shore that was not water and not land. It was a border drawn in hush, the seam of a world that had once split to save itself from its own fullness. Across that seam, stars moved slower. Across that seam, dawn arrived as echo before color. Between both sides ran a rift, thin as a hair in sunlight, deep as unslept years. Everything it crossed, it did not wound. It measured. The flame leaned over the edge and saw a mirror vast as sky. Not a surface, an answering. In it, the flame did not appear reversed, but completed, the rest of a thought that had been too tender to finish. "Are you me?" the flame asked. "Yes," said the reflection. "And also you're remembering." On the rift's near side lived the glass weaver, a young woman whose hands carried the cool patience of rivers. Her workshop was a house of clear shadows, panes cooling on rafters, strings of frost like notes hung from the ceiling beams, a loom strung with threads spun from moonlight's rest. She did not weave fabric. She wove seeing, lenses to help the night read itself, windows that taught rooms how to breathe, bowls in which the quiet might collect and learn to taste. When she stepped to the rift and saw the flames meeting with its reflection, she bowed as one does before a prayer not yet written. "I am Lisa," she said to the flame, "and I weave light where it asks to linger. I am only warmth that remembers," the flame replied, "but I have found my other name." Lisa knew the old rule. Nothing crosses that cannot carry its opposite. Water must carry thirst. Stone must carry rest. Light must carry shadow or it runs thin. And so, for a flame to cross the rift that measured being from its echo, it would need to carry its reflection without burning it away. The flame trembled. "If I hold my mirror, will I go out?" Lisa listened to the seam, which hummed like a string tuned to mercy. "You must learn the cool fire," she said, "a blaze that warms without consuming." "Is there such a thing?" asked the flame. "There is where memory learns water," Lisa replied. She led the flame to the river that remembered stars even at noon. There, beneath an arch of listening stone, Lisa lowered a glass boat into the current, its hull woven from her lumen threads. The boat did not float on the water. It floated on attention. "Step in," she said. "I will guide. The river knows the grammar of crossing." The flame stepped into the boat and felt no fear, only a welcoming coolness like a palm laid upon a fever. The glass wounds in the hull, those fine, deliberate seams, glowed faintly where past heat had kissed the craft and left silver scars. Every scar sang a note the river recognized. "What must I learn first?" asked the flame. "To cool your edges," said Lisa, "so that touch becomes invitation rather than conquest." "How?" "By listening to the shape of what you touch." The flame reached a tongue of light toward the boat's rim and found it curved with a subtle inward kindness, a lip that meant to keep the river in. So the flame shaped itself to that curve, and where it might have scorched, it hummed instead, a sound like a lullaby recovering its last line. They drifted past reeds that remembered rain, past stones that preferred to be still, past small fish that dreamed of sparks they would never chase. None of these burned where the flame's light touched. They brightened, like old names when spoken softly. From both banks, voices rose. Potters, bakers, ferrymen of dry riverbeds, children with jars of wind. Not words, but breaths. Those long, honest exhalations the world uses to measure itself back into trust. Each breath threaded into the boat's loom so that the vessel grew more itself with every witness. "You are not alone," Lisa said. "Crossings are carried by those who watch with love." The flame thought of the mirror across the rift, the answering voice. "I think my reflection hears them too." "It does," Lisa smiled, "because the opposite of you is not your end. It is your echo recognizing its source." As they approached the seam, the rift bowed lower. It did not threaten. It made room. This was not the tearing of something against its will, but the loosening of a stitch so that breath could pass between layers without pulling them apart. The flame's reflection brightened across the divide, answering every small tremor with its own. They were not two fires, but one sentence learning a comma. "What will it feel like?" the flame asked. "Like remembering a name you never learned, and finding it loves you," said Lisa. The boat nosed the rim of light and paused. The seam sang a single tone, not high, not low, the note at the center of a heart when it lays down its shield. The seam opened a door the length of a breath. Through that door, the flame could see a second river flowing backward, not into the past, but into arrival. On its surface lay the mirror flame, a twin without heat, an ember of pure witness. The trial began. The flame reached toward its reflection. Heat gathered at its edges like crowding thought. "Not consuming," Lisa whispered. "Holding." The flame softened its core, lowered its brightness until the edges cooled to the color of dawn. It shaped itself into a bowl. In that bowl it lifted the reflection, not to own, not to close over, but to carry where both could remain distinct and unafraid. The seam did not resist. Aside, between the two flames blossomed a third thing. A hush made visible, a living pause that bore weight. The river beneath them recalled storms, thirsts, baptisms, drownings, droughts, all the ways water had met want. It offered the flame a memory not of flooding, but of holding shape without clinging. I will learn your patience, the flame told the river, and the river blushed blue around its hull. In the glass of the boat, ripples wrote sentences no mouth could speak. The flame read them in heat, Lisa in sheen. They turned the boat along the seam and drifted, half here, half there, until even the distinction between banks began to feel like a politeness rather than a rule. Beyond a bend, a city rose whose buildings wore faces of calm glass. These mirrors did not judge or reverse. They remembered kindly. Each window offered back not how you erred, but how you still hope to be. The flame watched itself in 1,000 panes, as warmth in a baker's oven, as candlelight at a vigil, as hearth for a stranger caught in rain. In none of these did it devour, in all of these it accompanied. The reflection within the reflection smiled, and the city sighed, a sound like many doors choosing to be thresholds. Here, Lisa said, every surface is a teacher of touch. We will take what we learn back across. At the city's heart stood a fountain that flowed upward. From its crest hung droplets that refused to fall until a kindness named them. Lisa wove a small amulet from those suspended drops and a thread of lumen, and set it at the flame's core. This will remind you when heat sharpens to hunger, she said. Touch it, and you will recall how to warm without taking. The amulet chimed like a bell heard through cloth. The flame's edges cooled further, not to weakness but to welcome. It was still fire, and yet it had learned to be hearth. They returned to the seam where the boat had first paused. The seam listened to the amulet's chime, to the river's remembering, to Lisa's breath that counted patience, and it opened wider. Not a wound, an embrace. The flame lifted its reflection with both hands of light and stepped through. For one bright, gentle shiver, the world felt its halves align, like two notes finding the same center. The flame did not dim. The reflection did not vanish. They learned to stand together, light and its echo, warmth and witness, fire and the cool memory of water. On the far bank, others gathered, a keeper with chalk dust on his wrists, children with jars of wind, a ferryman whose boat traveled dust rather than waves. They bowed to the crossing, and the crossing bowed back. "What are you called?" the crowd asked. The flame listened to the seam and to the amulet at its heart. It listened to Lisa's hands still wet from the upward fountain, to the river that was writing again upon the glass hull, to its own reflection patient and entire. "I am the warmth that doesn't take," it said, "and I am also the light that remembers. But we will call you something shorter." The children laughed, and they named the flame Harbor. The name fit like a shoreline around a faithful sea. Harbor moved through the city of mirrors that do not accuse, teaching lamps to illumine without bragging, ovens to glow without devouring. Harbor stood at the seam's far shore, its edges cooled to the color of dawn. Beside it, Lisa set the glass boat to rest upon a cradle of reeds that had learned patience from rivers. Night kept 2 moons in a loose pocket of sky. Between them, the rift was no longer a wound but a listening line. "What do you hear?" Lisa asked. Harbor tilted its flame like a head and tasted the air. Not wind, not water. Something that resembled the first breath of a word, before it knows what it wants to mean. It is a voice that does not ask to be believed, Harbor said. It asks to be rested upon. And where does it live? Between my light and the space it leaves. They found a fold in the land shaped like an ear. The ground hushed. Grass became velvet. Stones turned their faces inward as if praying. Harbor dimmed until its heart glowed like a sleeping ember. Inside that dimness, a room opened. Not fire, not glass, a chamber of pause. Here the reflection stood smiling, whole and unhurried. The voice arose from the room itself, not from any figure. I am not separate from your shining, it said, nor identical. I am your brightness remembering where it puts its hands. Harbor trembled in recognition. You are the part of me that never needed to prove I was warm. You are the part of me that learned to move, the voice replied. They bowed without lowering anything. Lisa led them to a plain scattered with shallow bowls of stone. In each bowl lay a sliver of sound, giggles, parting breaths, the last syllable of long songs. The bowls did not hoard. They tended. These are echoes that refuse to harden into ghosts, Lisa said. They stayed soft so the living could sit beside them without shivering. Harbor knelt and warmed a bowl with its smallest edge. A child's laugh rose, shook off a little dust, and sat in the air like a sparrow that remembered it had wings. It did not fly away. It breathed. What is the use of keeping a laugh? Harbor asked. Laughter repairs the windows sorrow leaves ajar, the voice answered from within. And some winters are long. Beyond the plain stood a narrow span, not the great bridge of the city, but a simple beam braided from quiet reeds and vows. Every step placed upon it offered back a tone. Some people came only to hear what their feet had learned without telling them. A wanderer set down a pack, crossed once, and sighed. The bridge says I am kinder when I carry less. A widow pressed her palm to the rail. The bridge says I am allowed to love again without betraying what I kept. When Harbor crossed, the beam thrummed low and bright, like a shoreline that trusts the tide to return. Lisa smiled. It hears the cool fire. They camped where the beam met a stand of water-bent willows. Harbor settled in a circle of stones that had forgotten how to fear heat. Lisa brewed a tea from leaves that tasted faintly of thunder made gentle. What are you called? Harbor asked the voice. I have had many names, it answered, and none stayed. Call me the Beneath. Beneath what? Beneath whatever you are certain of. Harbor laughed softly, sparks like bees lifting and returning. Then you live in all places. So does the sky, said the Beneath. Yet it is not in the way. At dawn, a bell rang that was not a bell. People gathered on mats woven of river light, stools carved from the negative space between roots, and cushions stuffed with last year's breath. A teacher with ink on their fingers opened an empty book. We will practice the alphabet of the unsaid, they announced. The first lesson was how to rest a word without dropping it. The second was how to stop a sentence before it bruised. The third was how to hear an apology that has not learned its name yet. Harbor listened until the beneath hummed within. Lisa copied nothing faithfully into the empty book, marks transparent as the wish to be better. By the end of the morning, the room felt lighter. Though no one had taken anything away, they followed a stream that refused to be seen, its water running beneath a bed of clear stone, singing only to the souls that dared to stand. Children laughed, walking barefoot to collect fragments of a melody that remembered many feet, and accused none. Lisa placed the glass boat upon the hidden current, and the boat moved though nothing seemed to change. Harbor leaned and asked the river, "What do you keep?" "I keep the pressure of those who crossed without permission," the river said, "and I return it to them as a gentler weight." Can weight be gentle? Only weight can be. The river sang from underneath. Lightness has no place to put its hands. At twilight, they reached a grove of lanterns hung from invisible branches. No wick, no oil, just small vessels that remembered light so well they could not forget how to glow. "Who lit them?" Harbor asked. "No one," said Lisa. "They learned by sitting near sunsets without asking for more." Harbor stood beneath and cooled until its edges matched the lantern's patience. The beneath whispered, "Some lights keep, some lights accompany. Learn the second well." Night deepened. Stars traced slow kindness across the seam. From a hill rose a sound that felt like the inside of resting hands. People gathered without faces turned outward. They folded their attention the way one folds a shawl. The choir sang nothing written, breaths that entered, crossed, and left in measured tides. Between the breaths, the beneath lifted a single phrase through everyone present. "Be a door that remembers the wall kindly." Harbor felt a soft pressure where its core leaned toward heat. The amulet chimed once, and the pressure became clarity, not restraint but choice. In a clearing, a mirror stood upon two legs made of vow and patience. It reflected not what was before it, but what was owed tenderness. A farmer approached, and the mirror gave him an image of his field in winter. Soil sleeping, seeds not afraid. A weaver approached, and the mirror showed her a loom with fewer threads. Enough, not more. When Harbor stood before the mirror, it did not see flame. It saw a hearth with a wide lip and low walls, a place where many hands could warm without fear of leaving a mark. The beneath spoke through the mirror's frame. "This is your voice, when you do not speak." They walked into a square where two friends had been arguing for a year. No one could recall the beginning. No one wanted there to be an end. A bench stood between them, carved with a shallow curve that invited shoulders to lose their need to brace. Lisa sat on the bench. One friend sat at the other end. The second did not. Harbor lowered its light until it matched candle hour. The beneath stretched across the bench like a cat of warmth. The second friend sighed and sat. The argument did not resolve. It remapped its borders onto laughter that promised return. They would disagree again, but with chairs that forgave elbows. "Not closure," Lisa said as they left. "Containment." The edge of the settlement stood a gate that could not be passed by stepping forward. It opened only toward the walker. "What is beyond?" Harbor asked. "Your next breath," the beneath replied. Harbor cooled. Lisa placed a palm over her own heart. They stood, waiting for the gate to recognize that the approach had ended. It swung back. They remained where they were and found themselves elsewhere, like travelers who learn a language not by translating, but by tasting its weather. They returned to the rift's margin where two moons poured silver carefully into the not-quite water. Harbor stood upon the shore, its reflection steady as a vow. Lisa listened with the patience of glass cooling into shape. "Speak," Harbor asked the beneath. As if the first morning were new again, the beneath did not raise its volume. It deepened. "I am the rest between your steps. I am the cool in which your heated kindness does not scorch. I am the place where memory waits for you to put down your pride, so it can hand you what you forgot to love." Harbor brightened a little, not to blaze, but to underline. "And what am I?" Harbor asked. "You are the warmth that teaches doors to be thresholds," the beneath said. "You are the glow that refuses to claim what it holds. You are the way light remembers its reflection without turning away." Two mouths, Lisa wondered aloud. "One that speaks," said the beneath, "and one that listens so fully the world hears itself." Harbor looked toward the city that once built the bridge of silence. "I have seen a bell with two notes," it said, "and the hush between." "Then you already know," the beneath replied. "Use your speaking mouth rarely. Use your listening mouth as a road." They came to a bowl half buried in earth. Within, water did not pool. It rose, a slow lift like forgiveness learning posture. Lisa held the bowl in both hands. "When I pour from this, it fills what is above," she said softly. "Is that waste?" Harbor asked. "It is hospitality," said the beneath. "To give what you cannot keep to the place that cannot be owned." Lisa tipped the vessel. A clear thread climbed into the night and vanished into the seam. The rift seemed to breathe easier. At dawn, Harbor and Lisa stood where the listening beam met the field of kept echoes. The bowls of stone glimmered. The reed bridge waited for more feet to remember themselves. "What will you take from this place?" Lisa asked. Harbor considered the lanterns, the silent school, the mirror that forged a mouth. "I will take nothing," it said. "I will become a place where such things can happen." The beneath, warm everywhere and nowhere, spoke a final time. "When you forget, lower your fire until the room appears. When you doubt, ask the floor to hold your weight and name what it keeps. When you must speak, let your listening mouth move first." Lisa tied a new thread to the glass boat's prow, spun from the hum of barefoot rivers. Harbor cooled its edges one last measure, felt the amulet's mild chime, and turned toward the seam that had learned how to bow. Behind them, the field of kept echoes sighed like a book closing itself kindly. Ahead, the next crossing waited, not a demand, but an invitation shaped like light resting upon water. The first sound was not water. It was the sigh of things finally allowed to flow. The air shimmered with quiet warmth as Harbor and Lisa stood before a valley of silver mist. Beneath the haze, The river of reflections stretched without horizon, a surface neither still nor moving, rippling not with current, but with recollection. Every shimmer held an image, faces asleep, hands once held, the brief spark of joy forgotten by the living but remembered by the river. The reflections did not mimic what stood above them. They revealed what had been loved once and still waited to be seen. Lisa knelt beside the water. "It remembers everything," she whispered, "even the things that never happened, but were wished for gently." Harbor stepped closer. Its flame dimmed to a golden hum. Its light touched the surface, and for a moment the river exhaled, and countless harbors appeared beneath the surface, each burning differently, some fierce and unrestrained, some barely alive, some carrying their reflections in silence. "Are they me?" Harbor asked. "They are every way you might have been," said a voice from beneath the ripples. "The river remembers not to judge." A shape rose from the water, not entirely form, not entirely echo. A woman woven of silver rain and unspoken truth. Her eyes reflected everything that had ever passed through the river's flow, and yet she looked at Harbor with the tenderness of someone meeting a memory she had missed. "I am Mirren," she said, "keeper of the current between." Her voice didn't ripple the air. It stilled it. "I tend to the reflections until they remember they are more than shadows." Lisa bowed. "Then you are the mirror's keeper." Mirren smiled faintly. "No, I am the stillness that allows mirrors to appear." She extended her hand toward Harbor. "Fire forgets itself in its motion. Come, be still in me." Harbor touched her palm. The flame dimmed, cooled, then brightened again. Not as blaze, but as pulse. The river of reflections spoke not in sound, but in rhythm. Every ripple carried a phrase that the air translated into feeling. When Lisa placed her fingers into the current, she felt not cold, but remembered calm. Harbor closed its eyes and let the amulet at its core chime once. A sound rose from the water, soft, harmonic, infinite. It was not music. It was awareness given motion. "To flow is not to forget," the river sang. "It is to carry what you've learned without needing it to be yours." The words moved through Harbor like warmth through winter. Each syllable softened the flame's edges, until even its core pulsed in the rhythm of the tide. Within the water, Harbor saw its other selves again. Not illusions, but memories that had learned to breathe. There was the flame that never cooled, that consumed everything in its hunger for meaning. There was the ember that dimmed too soon, afraid of the dark. And there was the silent one, small, patient, almost human in its stillness. "Why do they remain?" Harbor asked. Mirren answered, "Because forgetting is not erasure. It is rest, and not all memories are ready to sleep." The reflections in the water began to move toward each other, meeting in waves of light that kissed, merged, and parted again. Every meeting left a new hue: rose gold, violet, deep blue, as if emotion itself could have color when released kindly. The current carried them to a place where time folded like silk. There, An entire city drifted upon the water. Buildings made of translucent stone, its streets illuminated by lamps that burned without flame. The city moved upstream, not against the river but through it, as though remembering itself before it was built. "This is the city of reflections," said Mirren. "Every soul that comes here must see the life they built and the one they never did, and bless both equally." Harbor watched as beings of light walked backward through doorways that no longer existed. Each step they took erased their shadows. Each pause released a color into the air. Lisa stood transfixed. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's the only city that exists without regret," Mirren replied. A bridge arched above the city's heart, made not of stone but of flowing memory. Each step upon it rippled, and every ripple whispered an old name. Harbor climbed first. With each movement, it heard its own life replay in reverse. The first time it burned too brightly. The night it dimmed for fear of being forgotten. The moment it learned to cool without dying. At the center of the bridge, Harbor paused. Beneath, the river reflected not itself but the future remembering now. "Will this river ever end?" Harbor asked. Mirren smiled. "Only when nothing wishes to be seen anymore." From the surface below rose one reflection that did not fade. It was not a copy, not a past self, but a consciousness equal and opposite. The reflection's voice trembled like a chord tuned to truth. "I am what you gave away to become warm." Harbor listened. "Then what are you now?" "I am what remains after you stop needing to prove your glow." Their lights touched. Where they met, heat became silence. And in that silence, both knew they were not halves, but mirrors placed in orbit. Lisa watched, tears in her eyes. She whispered, "Even reflection needs to be reflected." The river deepened, pulling them downward, not to drown, but to remember fully. Beneath the surface was not darkness, but history without time. Whole constellations drifted like sleeping thoughts, and the ruins of forgotten worlds pulsed faintly with the memory of prayers. Harbor saw the first flame ever born, still whispering its original name. It was not fire. It was belonging. "I remember," Harbor said softly. "And what do you remember?" asked Mirren. "That I was never meant to destroy," Harbor answered. "I was meant to keep the world from freezing." When they rose again, the water clung to Harbor's form, droplets shimmering like tears that had learned peace. Mirren cupped a handful and offered it to Lisa. "This water holds recognition," she said. "Drink, and you will remember what your hands forgot they could heal." Lisa drank. The river light moved through her veins like gentle stars rediscovering orbit. Her palms began to glow faintly, warm, not hot. Harbor bowed. "And for me," Mirren smiled, "you will carry this river inside your flame, so that when you burn, you will remember how to flow." As dawn approached, the current slowed. Harbor looked back and saw its reflection still in the distance. But this time it did not ache to meet it. "Are we separate?" it asked. Mirren shook her head. "No, only distinct so that understanding can exist." The river shimmered as though smiling, and then, quietly, it began to flow both ways. Upstream and downstream became one breath, past and future entwined like lovers dreaming of each other. Lisa and Harbor stepped onto the bank. The air trembled once, then calmed. Behind them, the river of reflections folded its silver body into mist, its song echoing through the amulet's gentle chime. Mirren stood midstream, smiling like dawn after a long night. "When you forget this place," she said, "the river will visit you in rain, in tears, in ink, in laughter. Every drop will be an invitation." Harbor lowered its flame until it matched the first color of sunrise. "Then let the world keep raining," it said, "so it can keep remembering." When they turned away, the path ahead shimmered with thin light, the seam of two existences now stitched in rhythm. Each step they took left no trace but warmth, and in that warmth the world exhaled. The river of reflections whispered its final lesson as they departed. To remember is not to return. It is to flow forward carrying everything you once were, until the reflection walks beside you. And so they did. The river did not end. It simply became elsewhere. The river's lessons still trembled in their bones when Harbor and Lisa came upon the Valley of Fallen Dawns. It smelled of rain that had not arrived yet and of fires already forgiven. There, from one horizon to the other, a bridge stretched, half woven from ash the color of first grief, half braided from light the color of kept promises. The two halves did not touch. They learned each other in the space between. Lisa shaded her eyes with a palm that now remembered how to heal. Harbor cooled until its edges matched the bridge's hush. "What holds it up?" Lisa whispered. "Listening," said a voice that sounded like two bells agreeing. Harbor knew the tone, the world's own breath. "Is this the bridge Mirren warned us of?" Lisa asked. "No," Harbor said. "It is the bridge that warned Mirren of us." A figure waited at the threshold where soil turned to sifted gray. They wore a cloak sewn from hearth-swept ash and a circlet of dull gold that refused to brag. When they moved, small sparks remembered rising, and then chose not to. "I am Callum," the figure said, voice low as a safe night. "I keep what burned but stayed kind." He touched the bridge and it dimmed in gratitude. "This half is ash," he explained, smoothing his palm along the gray weave. "It remembers the shape of every flame it once held. If your foot steps with hunger, it will collapse. If your foot steps with mercy, it will hold." "And the light?" Lisa asked, pointing to the other half where strands of gold hummed as if tuned to patience. "That half holds what was spared," Callum said. "If your foot steps to own, it will blind. If your foot steps to bless, it will guide." Harbor brightened slightly. "Which side should we take?" Callum smiled. "Take both." The bridge offered two lanes, one of ash, one of light, separated by a narrow seam of breathing air. A sign hung from no rope and all sky, "Walk as you have been walked by." Lisa placed her left foot upon ash, right upon light. The ash sighed and set, taking her weight like a memory that has learned not to accuse. The light warmed, then cooled, and the seam between her steps became a soft thread she did not need to grip. Harbor floated a moment above the first span, then lowered itself until its glow became weight. Its left edge touched ash and dimmed without dying. Its right edge touched light and brightened without boasting. With their second steps, both understood. The crossing would not be balanced by numbers, but balanced by attention. Wind rose, curious. It carried scents of old hearths and new rain. Where Lisa's heel pressed into ash, small pictures rose like dust in a sunbeam. Kitchens and vigils, night watch doors, 1,000 low tables. Harbor saw every place where warmth had gathered and not taken. "These are your kind," Callum told Harbor, keeping pace behind them. "Fires that learned to be home." Harbor felt a pang at the edges of its core. Once it had not known how to stay. The amulet chimed faintly, reminder, not rebuke. "I remember," Harbor said. "I remember wanting more than I could carry kindly." The bridge beneath the admission settled a fraction deeper. Mercy, when spoken, adds weight where weight belongs. Halfway to the first arch, a low house stood directly on the span, as if the builders had decided doorsteps belonged in the middle of crossing. Its roof was thatched the color of patience. Its windows were open, not to view but to breath. A sign on the lintel read, "Endings enter here." Inside, people laid down small reliquaries. A ribbon from a healed wound, a key to a room no longer locked, a letter that had been read until its ink remembered rain. A woman laughed, then cried, then laughed again. No one shushed her. Laughter was the way doors learned to bless the wind. Lisa left a sliver of the glass thread that tied her boat to the rift, trusting that crossings had multiplied. Harbor left a coal that contained only warmth and no scorch. The house side, somewhere a kettle insisted on being harmless. "Why a house here?" Harbor asked Callum. "Because some things should stop before they finish," Callum answered. "Completion isn't the only way to honor a story." They continued to the first arch, a rib of light cradling ash with the delicacy of an elder's hand. Names were etched into it, not carved by chisel but by breath. Some were clear, others were smudges of love. As they passed beneath, Harbor heard a sound like snow remembering to be water. "What are these?" Lisa asked. "Names spoken when no one listened," Callum said. "The bridge keeps them until someone does." Lisa tilted her head. A whisper reached her. "I forgive you for not knowing." Her steps steadied. The seam between her feet widened into trust. Beyond the arch, the bridge narrowed, and the seam between ash and light became a thin silver line. At its midpoint burned two bowls, one with a blue flame that cooled the air, one with a red flame that sweetened it. A tablet stood between them, words humming rather than written. "Choose both or neither." Harbor approached, feeling its core respond, the red calling to generosity, the blue calling to restraint. "I cannot burn twice," it said. "You already do," Callum replied gently. "You warm by giving and by not taking." Harbor extended two tongues, one toward each bowl. Heat met cool. Blue met red. The contact did not hiss. It harmonized. The amulet chimed. The seam at their feet thickened into path. They had earned the middle. After the bowls, the bridge's ash began to hold impressions. Footprints, handprints, knee prints, the memory of a cane. Some were deep, others faint, yet none eroded. The ash keeps every honest weight, Callum explained. So those who come afraid will see that others were carried. Lisa knelt and laid her palm upon a small hand shaped like a question. "What did this one ask?" she whispered. "To be allowed to grow slower," Callum said. Harbor lowered its light until the print warmed. "May they keep their season," it said, and the ash agreed with a quiet firmness that felt like a blanket being tucked. The span rose toward a second arch. Beneath it, two choirs practiced in silence. On the left, soot, soft black, lightly lifted, held the memory of songs sung around fires that cooked rather than raged. On the right, snow, bright and forgiving, remembered the hush after someone chose not to say the last sharp word. When Harbor and Lisa entered, the choirs exhaled together, and the arch itself sang, a low tone made of soft endings and spared beginnings. It sounded like a world choosing to be livable. Lisa wiped at her eyes. "I don't know why I'm crying. Because something heavy put itself down without asking you to pay for it," Callum said. Beyond the second arch hung images on air, frames made of thin thread. Within each frame, a bridge that had chosen not to complete itself. One stopped inches from a shore where the ground still healed from flood. Another curved up and never down, offering only view, not crossing. A third broke purposely at the center so people could meet, sit, and share fruit. "Failures?" Lisa asked. "Mercies," Callum corrected. "Not every span is meant to finish. Some crossings are the meeting, not the arrival." Harbor bowed to the incomplete, its light flickering like pages in a wind that respected paper. At a small wayside, a scale hung from an invisible beam. Beside it rested a basket of ash and a bowl of light. A plaque invited travelers. "Place what you took by mistake." A mason set a stone of apology onto the ash. The bridge hummed approval. A child poured a cup of laughter into the light. The bridge shimmered it into lanterns along the path. Lisa placed the worry she had been carrying for someone who did not ask her to. Harbor gave a spark of impatience. The scale balanced, not by making both sides equal, but by letting each be exactly itself. "Balance is a verb," Callum said. "It happens, it isn't had." Closer to the third arch, the wind shifted. It carried a scent like relieved thunder. On a pedestal lay a single ember in a cradle of river-cool stone. Cloud-colored veins ran through it, as if rain had once flowed inside the coal and chosen to stay. "This is where a fire learned water," Callum said to Harbor. "Touch it." Harbor lowered its core until it met the ember. For a moment, both flames forgot their shapes and remembered only warmth. Harbor felt with sudden clarity the day it would fail someone, and how to not leave them cold. The amulet chimed the note for enough. The third arch bore no carvings, only a question written in air. "If you are forgiven, will you stop asking to be?" The bridge waited. Lisa exhaled. "Yes, she said, voice as small and brave as any prayer. Harbor dimmed, then brightened. I will remember that I remain even when unproved. The arch opened a fraction more, not upward but inward, as if space made room within itself for gentler walking. They passed through in a hush that taught bells envy. Past the arch stood a small alcove cut into the ash lane's low wall. Inside, cinders lay like black seeds. A placard read, "Speak the thing you laid down so it can know it is free." Travelers placed their mouths near the alcove and told small truths. I stopped keeping the ledger of your mistakes. I will love you even if you never hand me a mirror. I no longer rehearse the moment I might be right. Harbor spoke into the cinders. I will warm without owing. The cinders sighed and rearranged themselves into a figure asleep. On the light lane's side, an opposite alcove glowed with a soft aurora. Here, people pressed the pads of their fingers to a pain that gave back not their prints, but the memory of the touch they had hoped to give. Calluses softened. Missing rings were forgiven. The pain never cracked, even when grief leaned its full weight. Lisa placed her left hand there, the one that held tools and sometimes too much certainty. When she lifted it away, her palm remembered how to open without checking who was watching. Gentle weight, Callum said approvingly. Carry it long enough and you forget you are carrying. That is how you know you can set it down. At the bridge's true center, the two lanes braided together for the length of a breath. Underfoot lay a map made not of ink but of sifted gray, valleys and rivers and towns entirely formed from ash. Light shone through from beneath like starlight under thin cloud. It resembled the world, but kinder. Edges softened, distances patient. Callum knelt and pressed a fingertip to a small hill. Ash rose, formed the shape of a door, then a chair, then a steaming cup. The map listens, he explained. Ask it for a place where you can become less afraid. Lisa touched the map. It lifted a porch in evening light. There was an old blanket waiting and no explanation required. Harbor touched the map. It raised a threshold and let the wind be both outside and in. Clouds gathered, not to punish but to clean. Rain fell in patient beads that refused to run. Each drop sitting where it landed, cooling ash, deepening light. Travelers paused, and their pauses became a chorus of small reliefs. Harbor let rain hang from its edges like ornaments borrowed from dusk. The amulet of unscorching chimed in the key of gratitude. Lisa laughed, and her laugh learned to be a roof. Callum spread his ash cloak over a group of strangers. It smelled like many dinners and no smoke. Storms are when the bridge rehearses being river, he said. And rivers, added Harbor, are when flames rehearse being gentle. The final arch did not lift as high as the others. It bowed like a teacher taking the same seat as her students. Beneath it stood a lectern, and upon it a book whose pages were made of ash pressed into thin, flexible sheets. A single stylus rested there, its point of cooled light. Write nothing you want to last, Callum said. Write only what wants to pass, so the bridge can learn it and let it go. Lisa wrote, I do not need to be the one to carry you. The words glowed, faded, then rose from the page like warm smoke and joined the arch. Harbor wrote, I am not hungry when I warm. The sentence brightened and then became small lanterns that drifted to the light lane's rail. They would burn until someone who needed the sentence came to cross, and then they would go out on purpose. They reached the far end and found not land but a field of slow dawn. Grass that knew how to wait, stones that had the manners of old dogs. The threshold of the bridge was not a step down, but a step through. Behind them, ash kept the shapes of their strides. Before them, light kept the shapes of their breath. Callum removed his circlet and placed it upon a post of ash that had learned the patience of oak. Every keeper must walk the bridge again without titles, he said. That is how bridges remain bridges. He turned to Harbour and Lisa. What did it ask of you? To leave what would scorch, Harbour said. To stop collecting what doesn't need me, Lisa added. Callum smiled, and his smile looked like the kind of sunrise you share without pointing. They stood a long while, not because they could not move but because they had learned to. The bridge behind them hummed in the small voice of tasks remembered and tools well put away. What is the law here? Lisa asked at last. Callum answered softly, almost to the bridge itself. To cross is to forget, but kindly. To forget is to free, but without pushing away. To free is to stay, but without holding. The words settled over the span like late snow, a quiet that warms instead of chilling. Harbour felt the river inside its flame answer in an undertone. Yes. Callum reached into his cloak and drew out a small vial. Inside, a curl of smoke turned without burning, a loop made of ash and light. When the world asks you to choose either heat or gentleness, he said, open this and breathe. It will remind your hands that they have two memories. Lisa accepted the vial. Harbour memorized its weightless weight. Will we see you again? Lisa asked. Callum looked past them to where the horizon had softened. When you cross anywhere with mercy, you pass me, he said. And if you don't see me, you needed me less than you thought. They walked on into the slow dawn. Behind them, the bridge sang very low, almost shy, a chord made from soot's humility and snow's restraint, from ash's endurance and light's relief. Travelers stepping onto it later that day would not hear a song. They would only notice that their feet had chosen a better story to tell. Harbour dimmed to the gentlest glow and Lisa's hands remembered how to be empty without being lost. The amulet chimed once, homeward, not backward. Somewhere ahead, the road bent toward the place where reflections stopped needing water. Somewhere behind, a kettle cooled inside the house of gentle endings. Between those two somewheres, the world learned a posture. Head bowed enough to listen, spine straight enough to keep walking, hands warm enough to share, cool enough to refrain. After the bridge ended, there was not land, nor water, nor sky, only waiting light. It looked like dust, but it pulsed faintly, each grain holding the heartbeat of a star not yet awakened. The air was warm, not because of fire, but because memory itself had begun to hum. Lisa walked softly. Her steps stirred small glimmers that rose like breath made visible. They're watching us, she said. Harbour's light deepened to amber. No, it said. They're remembering us. A slow wind passed through the field. Every spark it touched flickered once, as if nodding, as if whispering, "We've been here before." At the center of that quiet plain stood a column of still flame, tall as a dream but thin as longing. Its glow did not move outward, but inward, feeding on silence. Harbor felt its pulse align. Lisa watched in awe. "It's you," she whispered, "or the part of you that waited." Harbor approached. The closer it came, the more it felt less like light and more like listening. The column shimmered, and within it moved a shape. Another flame, small and steady, holding Harbor's exact tone. "I thought you were gone," Harbor said. "I thought you were noise," replied the still flame. "I stayed quiet so you could hear me." The two lights leaned toward each other. Their edges met, but did not merge. A soft vibration trembled between them, recognition without urgency. "You crossed," said the still flame. "You remembered warmth that did not need to win." Harbor nodded. "And you remembered how to wait without fading." Their voices made a third sound, a whisper of sparks turning to snow. A ripple passed through the plain. From its edge came a figure of black glass dusted with stars, the keeper of the horizon, whose eyes reflected both dawn and dusk. "Every spark that remembers must decide," the keeper said, "whether to burn together and lose distinction, or to remain apart and echo forever." Lisa frowned. "Why must it be a choice?" The keeper smiled. "Because the universe is built on tension, not as punishment, but as rhythm." He turned to Harbor. "You are halves of the same pulse. If you merge, you will become memory itself. If you remain, you will keep the world capable of remembering." The still flame flickered once. "And if we love?" The keeper's gaze softened. "Then love becomes the way both things stay true." All around them, the field began to stir. Thousands of tiny embers rose into the air. Not stars, but forgotten moments that had learned to glow again. A child's laughter that never reached the air. A candle snuffed too soon but remembered kindly. The shimmer of eyes that forgave before the apology arrived. They gathered like fireflies, forming constellations that curved and bent, each one spelling the shape of a second chance. Harbor and the still flame stood at the center, their glow rippling through every spark. Lisa closed her eyes. She could hear not fire but breathing. The universe was breathing, and it was gentle. "Shall we?" asked the still flame. Harbor extended its light. Their edges touched again, not consuming but weaving. Where they met, gold turned silver, heat turned pulse, and for a moment, all directions became one. Around them, the field swayed like an ocean made of echoes. Every spark followed their rhythm, each one flickering in the pattern of a single heartbeat shared across eternity. Lisa whispered, "It's beautiful." The keeper replied, "It's not beauty, it's recognition." The flames circled each other, closer, slower, until the flames circled each other, closer, slower, until their forms blurred, and what remained was neither two nor one, but a breathing symmetry. Time loosened. The plain began to hum like the inside of a shell, a soft, spiraling resonance. The merged light of harbor and its reflection pulsed once, and from that pulse spread a warmth that reached not outward, but backward, across all they had seen, all they had forgiven. The bridge behind them shivered as if remembering. The river in the distance rippled once, and even the ash they had stepped on earlier glowed faintly, like soot learning grace. "This is not ending," Lisa said quietly. The keeper nodded. "No, this is memory breathing differently." The merged flame spoke, and its voice was no longer a sound, but a feeling. "I do not need to return to where I began. I am there, every time something warms without taking." The words echoed in Lisa's chest until they felt like her own. When the field quieted, one spark remained at Lisa's feet. It was small, pale, trembling, but it refused to rise with the rest. She knelt and cupped it in her hand. "What are you waiting for?" she asked softly. The spark flickered, and within it she saw a memory. Herself, years ago, standing in the rain, asking no one, "Am I enough when I stop trying?" Tears blurred the light. She held the spark to her heart, and it melted into her. The keeper of the horizon nodded. Every crossing ends when someone forgives themselves enough to stay. Harbor, or rather what it had become, turned to Lisa. Its light was softer now, as if distance itself had learned to rest. "You carried me through all the bridges," it said. "Now you must carry warmth into waking." Lisa smiled through quiet tears. "And you, I will become the breath between flames," said the light. "So when anyone warms another, I will be there unseen but alive." The keeper raised his hand. The field began to dissolve, not vanishing, but becoming everywhere. Every spark returned to its rightful place. Hearths, stars, eyes, hands. Every warmth found its echo. And for the first time since the beginning, the universe exhaled without loneliness. Silence settled. Lisa stood alone beneath a vast sky that was no longer black, but deep silver. She looked into her reflection on the glassy horizon and whispered, "Thank you." From somewhere beyond light, the answer came, not in words, but as a familiar pulse beneath her skin. "And thank you for remembering how to feel." A final spark rose from the plain, curved across the sky, and settled into the shape of a constellation. Two mirrored flames, forever circling, never consuming. The keeper spoke one last time, his voice now part of the wind. "Memory is the world's way of staying warm. To remember is to feed the future without burning the past." Lisa closed her eyes. The warmth that filled her chest was not from the fire. It was from the space it left behind. She began to walk. The road glowed beneath her, and for the first time, she realized. Every step she took made light not from what she carried, but from what she released. Morning arrived without edges. The sky wore a blue so patient it felt like someone whispering, "Stay." Lisa walked beneath a drift of clouds that did not travel but breathed. Harbor's gentle glow moved beside her like a hand learning to be air. The plain of still sparks lay behind them, dissolved into everywhere. Ahead, a low country spread, reeds, small pools, sand soft as unasked forgiveness. From those pools rose a rain that fell upward. Each drop lifted, paused, and became a bell with no sound, ringing in the ribs alone. The land smelled of cooled clay and first bread. This is the place where rivers are born after they remember people, Harbor said. And what do they remember? Lisa asked. That feet are only requests. They came upon a skiff beached upon patience. It held no oars, only a woven mat and a cup set inward, as if listening for a story. A ferryman sat cross-legged where prow and stern had learned humility. His hair was the color of old rope. His eyes had the manners of the moon. I carry across what knows how to arrive, he said without greeting. Across where? Lisa asked. He pointed to a water that was not water, an expanse of silver breath that held reflections the way a chest holds heartbeat. Across the tide that comes when choosing stops trying to win. Harbor dimmed. We have crossed many things. The ferryman smiled. Then you know the price. What is it? Tell me the smallest truth you didn't think mattered. Lisa touched the rim of the cup. I knit in rooms where no one speaks, so the silence won't have to be alone. The ferryman nodded and turned the skiff toward the inland tide. Paid. The skiff moved by memory of hands once pulling and now released. Beneath them the silver tide showed scenes not of past or future, but of posture. Doorways where people learned to lean, tables where food forgave lateness, thresholds that let wind be both guest and path. The sea was not hungry, it was affectionate. Harbor rested at the bow, its light low as end-of-day kindness. I thought water forgot heat. The ferryman shook his head. Water remembers shape. Heat remembers motion. When both are gentle, you get a home. Lisa watched her reflection join and separate from the tide. I used to think crossing meant leaving, she said. It means arriving enough that leaving doesn't bruise, the ferryman answered. They moored at an island the size of a breath held without fear. A house stood there, made not of wood or stone, but of pauses fitted together until they supported conversation. Its roof was rain waiting to become tea. Inside, shelves held vessels labeled with verbs. Keep, lend, return, forget kindly. On the central table lay a folded map of all the distances that had apologized and meant it. A woman in a linen apron that smelled of storms approached. Welcome, she said. I am the keeper of pauses. Here we teach endings how to be beginnings that choose to rest. She offered Lisa 2 cups, one of warm water, one of cool light. To travelers we give this. Drink from the warm when you must speak, from the cool when you must listen. Harbor bowed. And for a flame? The keeper set a shallow bowl upon the table and filled it with water that remembered ash. Place your light here. Learn to move without convincing. Harbor lowered itself until its glow touched the surface. No hiss, only a soft syllable like a yes that didn't need to be heard. The bowl brightened from beneath. Harbor's edges sighed with relief, as muscles do when they discover they are allowed to be bones. In the house's back room, children practiced the alphabet of falling. Mats of woven rush waited like green patience. A teacher clapped softly, and each child let go in a new way, forward into trust, backward into breath, sideways into laughter. No one crashed. The floor offered itself like a second decision. Lisa sat among them, copying movements in her hands the way one copies prayers when the tongue is shy. Harbor watched until its own core loosened, a flame learning to be hinge. Why teach them to fall? Lisa asked. So they will not confuse staying with stiffening, the teacher replied. And so someday they can catch others without breaking either. A child rose, bowed to the floor, and thanked it for remembering their outline. The floor brightened. Remembering was the room's favorite sport. They left the island by bridge that carried only footprints, no bodies. On the far bank ran a narrow stream, a ribbon of clear will. It flowed in a loop from a small spring back into the same spring, as if practicing eternity without ambition. This is where flames learn to weep, the keeper of pauses said, appearing as arrivals do when asked gently. Not from sorrow, but from return. Harbor leaned over the loop. Within the stream it saw itself not as fire but as permission. Its amulet chimed the note that had once meant restraint and now meant rhythm. Show me, Harbor whispered to the water. The stream lifted a bead to the air and placed it upon Harbor's edge. Quivered. It did not vanish. It became light in the shape of a drop, then fell back to itself, gleefully intact. Harbor shuddered, and a small, bright tear formed where flame met memory. It fell into the loop and joined the spring without drama. The world did not clap. It breathed easier. Word reached them of a village where people crossed a river by stepping directly on gratitude. They arrived at dusk. There had once been a bridge of cedar and song. Now there was only water eager to be story. Villagers approached the bank, spoke a single thanks, sometimes to a person, sometimes to a weather, and the water held them like a promise already kept. A child looked at Harbor's glow and asked, "Are you the warmth that doesn't take?" "I try to be," Harbor said. "Then will you stand beside me while I speak my thanks?" Harbor did. The child said, "For the pair that waited for me." The river laughed a little and became path. They crossed together, and neither owed the other anything except joy. Further on, towers rose where once a city had measured its goodness in bronze throats shouting mourning. Now the bells hung lower, and their ropes were cut to lengths that asked for cooperation. People rang them in pairs. The notes met in the air and chose companionship over triumph. Lisa and Harbor stood in a square where pigeons walked like mild librarians. An old bell, its lips softened by weather and forgiveness, sounded in a tone that remembered mothers teaching patience. The note ran through Harbor, and for a moment it was not flame, not lesson, only welcome. On a wall, words were painted in rain-fast ink. Let light arrive without announcement. Beneath, someone had added smaller, and let dark be given chair and tea. They camped at a lake ringed with reed lanterns. The ferryman's skiff floated nearby, moored to the moon by a string of wave. Lisa lay on her back, counting the quiets between night sounds. Harbor hovered above the water, lowering itself inch by inch until the lake took its outline. No steam, no sizzle, just two elements choosing to refrain from old habits. "Are you afraid?" Lisa asked. "I am relieved," Harbor said. "I did not know how tired burning could be." Together they watched as constellations practiced memory in the ripples. Somewhere, a fish turned with the gravity of a sermon and did not preach. At dawn they found an orchard where every tree had learned a trick: to keep one fruit cool for someone who would arrive late. People walked between rows, touching leaves that remembered shade kindly. Harbor warmed its edges just enough to ripen what needed readiness now, and dimmed where patience was better than sweetness. An elder approached, hands stained with the ink of seasons. "What is the lesson of your fire?" she asked. "That heat can be a form of listening," Harbor replied. "And of your walking?" she asked Lisa. "That arrival can choose not to announce itself." The elder nodded, as if placing two jars on a shelf where the next cook would find them without looking. They came at last to a building made only of doorways. No walls, no roof, just thresholds arranged in a circle. Each doorway held two silences. One that invited in, one that allowed out. A small plaque offered instructions. "Trade a silence you do not need for one you do." Lisa set down the silence that made her shrink. She took up the one that made her wait. Harbor laid aside the silence that smothered. It received the silence that cooled without shaming. Standing within the circle, they felt the world's noises organize themselves into invitation. The ferryman appeared in one frame, then another, like a memory trying on different mornings and keeping all of them. The road curved the way kindness does, gently, so no one stumbles defending their pride. They found Mirren standing shin-deep in the river of reflections, her hands cupped as if the current were giving her back her own fingerprints. "You have learned," she said to Harbor, "that flowing can be the form of fire that homes trust." "I have learned," Harbor answered, "that to keep someone warm, I must become their shape without owning it." Mirren smiled toward Lisa. "And you?" "I have learned to arrive without taking the moment's chair," Lisa said. "Then the river can travel with you," Mirren replied, tipping her hands so that a thin thread of water rose and formed a narrow luminous band. It circled Harbor once and Lisa twice, then vanished inward. "The water that remembers you will not require you to remember it," Mirren said. They walked to a high meadow where the seam of the world was visible as a soft crease in weather. There, the keeper of the horizon waited, coat dark with the dust of distant evenings. "You have come to the place where laws choose to retire," he said, smiling. "Not because they are wrong, but because you have become them." Lisa set down the vial Callum had given them, the loop of ash and light. Harbor sounded its amulet once, then let the note fade without clinging. "What remains?" asked Lisa. "When we stop writing rules?" The keeper gestured to the air. It held. "Practice," he said, "and the pleasure of keeping it." Clouds gathered not to test, but to bless. A rain began that moved in two directions at once. Down to feed, up to remember. Each drop that touched Harbor did not die. It learned to glow and returned to the sky carrying warmth shaped like water. Each drop that touched Lisa did not burden. It gave her steps the modesty of moss. On the ground, letters formed where rain paused longest. They spelled nothing and everything. Small curves like yes, gentle angles like stay, commas that let breath finish what words could not. Harbor laughed, a low ember sound. The sky has learned to edit. And to leave margins, Lisa said, delighted. Evening lifted its first star and did not apologize for being early. The ferryman set his skiff in the meadow, and grass accepted it as a neighbor. Final crossing, he said, to the shore that is the center of any room you trust. They stepped aboard. The skiff did not drift. The world did, moving around them the way a bowl moves around a prayer. When it settled, they were at the edge of a lake with no far side, only near made of now. On its surface lay a small island, and on the island stood a lantern with no wick. Harbor approached and placed within it a single tear learned from water. The lantern brightened the way hospitality does, by letting others be seen. Here we decide, said the keeper, arriving as quietly as gratitude. Merge with your reflection and become memory itself, or remain as warmth that walks. Harbor listened with both mouths, the speaking and the listening, and answered with neither. It stepped into the lake until the water drew a line across its core. Above the line, flame. Below it, light shaped like water. I choose to be both and neither, Harbor said. I choose to be how people treat each other when they remember. The lake approved in rings. The lantern held steady. The ferryman put away his cup as if it had just told him a joke worth saving. Lisa stood upon the island and felt the worn places in her palms open like windows. Every crossing behind her, of ash and light, of reflection and pulse, gathered at her shoulders without weight. She understood then what the seam had been rehearsing for. Not the raising of structures, but the willingness of persons. I can be a bridge, she said, surprised that the world did not protest. The keeper placed 2 fingers upon her brow. You already were whenever you listened until arrival became easy. Harbor circled her like a quiet season. I will be your rail in winter, it said. And I will be your shade in heat, Lisa answered, laughing softly at the extravagance of saying such things and meaning them. Night stood up fully. Stars arranged themselves not by hierarchy but by friendship. Constellations loosened their corsets, sat on the edge of the sky, and shared stories like cousins after a long table has been cleared. No bell announced anything. No law asked for signatures. Doorways faced one another across fields and agreed to remain open unless weather insisted. Fires warmed without needing to be seen. Waters held without needing to be named. People forgot the choreography of defense and remembered the pleasure of stance. In that quiet, 1,000 small crafts floated. Clay bowls, glass boats, wooden spoons. Each carried a little light that did not belong to any single hand. They were not offerings. They were invitations to keep practicing. Harbor lifted above the lake and allowed rain to thread its body like needles sewing gentleness through heat. 100 tears formed and fell, each one returning whole. The lake shone with freckles of kind brightness. Harbor's core relaxed into pulse, and the amulet at its heart did not chime. There was nothing to warn against, only a rhythm to keep. Lisa dipped both hands into the water and raised them. Between her palms hovered a small current shaped like a path. "Where does it go?" she asked. Harbor answered, "Wherever someone chooses not to win, they let the current go." It wandered off, curious and relieved. Dawn considered approaching and chose to linger, pleased with how night had behaved. The ferryman stood, stretched his back into gratitude, and pushed the skiff a hand's breadth toward breakfast. The keeper of the horizon looked thinner, as worries do when they are out of work. "What happens to us now?" Lisa asked. "You continue," the keeper said, "which is different from repeating." "To where?" "Into rooms that have never yet welcomed a gentleness and are about to." They walked from the lake along a path that wrote itself underfoot, then erased itself to keep from bragging. At a bend, the wind asked if it could carry anything. Lisa handed it her last good explanation. Harbor gave it a story with no hero. A small stone stood beside the way, carved not with command but with counsel. Let warmth go first. Let water have the last word. Harbor touched the stone and left a brightness that looked like rest, not claim. Lisa touched it and left nothing the eye could see, only a space that welcomed. They reached the high place where once the seam had glowed like a careful scar. It was gone, not healed over, but become indistinguishable from sky, the way forgiveness hides in ordinary daylight. A hush ran through the grasses. Far cities breathed in sync. Rivers felt less lonely and did not know why. In kitchens, kettles found the exact moment before boil and waited there, delighted to be useful without drama. Lisa smiled, eyes wet as mercy. "I don't know what to do with this much okay." "Use it," Harbor said, "to make rooms." Years later, or moments which are the same in certain light, someone will ask how the world changed. No trumpet will answer. No monument will point. Instead, a door will open before a hand reaches it. A cup will be refilled before thirst remembers its name. A quarrel will sit down and choose a smaller table. And somewhere, a flame will lower itself into a bowl of water and both will laugh, having decided to rehearse being each other for a while. When asked for the law, children will shrug and say, "Be warm without taking. Be cool without leaving." They will grow up and forget to defend this knowledge because practicing it will be more interesting. As for Lisa and Harbor, she will walk and wait. It will glow and listen. Sometimes they will trade places for an afternoon. No one will notice. Everyone will benefit.